Welcome to On the Journey, stories for leaders and aspiring leaders. This is your host, Leo Rodriguez. I'm very excited about bringing you a little preview of what this podcast is all about. Behind it, there is a very simple idea, and it is to give you an honest, inside view into the experiences of leaders who are in the trenches, that are executing and deploying high levels of leadership today, just like you and me. On the Journey is a platform for them to share and for you to learn how they are traversing that journey. And I want to do this by exploring specifically their transition points, whether they were an account executive or an individual contributor and they moved into a leadership role for the first time, or as they progressed into higher levels of leadership in their careers. Through honest, no-holds-barred conversation, I will explore their motivations, their preparation, their mindset, who their mentors were, frameworks, mistakes, thoughts, and advice, so you can put them into action on your own journey. If you're a leader or an aspiring leader, you'll have a first row seat to my guest experience, almost like if you can join me and together we can pick the brains. So are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to On the Journey. Enjoy. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 5 of On the Journey, Stories for Leaders and Aspiring Leaders. This is your host, Leo Rodriguez, and this one is another special one, particularly for those that are trying to jump into your first leadership role. I will have with me Ryan Pageau. Ryan Pageau is currently an area vice president for the west of the U.S. at Calibra, a company that I work for. And he has a good leadership career. He started as an individual contributor for IBM and other companies, then transitioned into SAP, where he became a leader through the Aspiring Leader program. And from there, we plugged him to work with us at Calibra. He took on the west of Canada and very quickly demonstrated his capabilities and moved to manage the west of the US, which is a very challenging region back then. Ryan is great. Is a fantastic young leader. I love Ryan, the way he explains his career, his trajectory, his journey. I enjoyed this conversation very much. Ryan talks about why leadership for him, what leadership is, and he describes it being a passion for team success and how his athletic career influenced his leadership, his style, his passion for winning, and particularly the habit for success, having played at a very, very high level sports, how that influenced him and his thinking about team execution and team success. He also talks about how sports and then later in his leadership career, he was exposed to great coaches that informed his style. And he also talks about how not so good coaches that allowed him to avoid some pitfalls. One of the things I really like from Ryan is his grit, and he's always pushing and trying to get that extra nudge from every situation. And I think that was demonstrated when he pursued, and in his own words, he campaigned for his first leadership role. Once he decided he wanted to go for it, he campaigned to get his first roles. He didn't get it. He didn't get his couple tries. And that is very hard if you're trying to get into leadership. But then he ultimately got it, and he's great at it. I can't recommend Ryan enough. And then one of the last things I'll highlight in this intro is that we talked a lot about, do you need to be a great player to be a great leader? Do you need to be a winner? And I think Ryan summarized it very well when he says, I didn't necessarily want it to be the best, but I wanted to play at the highest level. So when I come into a leadership role, I know what those practices are, I know what those habits are, and I know what playing at the highest level is, so I can instill that in my team. And I think that's a very important distinction. I want to thank Ryan for being part of this podcast, and to you, the audience, all of this and much more in this great conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Pageau. Today is a very exciting date. I have a person that I admire and esteem a lot as a guest, and very excited about bringing him to you. His name is Ryan Pageau. He's a regional VP at Calibra. We worked together there. I had the experience and the pleasure to interview him and bring him into the organization. Ryan has a long career as an individual contributor and as a leader through IBM, SAP, and then Calibra. And besides being just a great, wholesome person, he's a great leader. He demonstrated great leadership. And the thing that struck me from Ryan when I met him is, if you pick up from your mind what a leader that's got it, Ryan probably checks 99.9% of the boxes. It's he's not only a great person, but also embodies sort of a lot of the values that I think in leadership. So Ryan, welcome to On the Journey.
Well, thank you so much, Leo. Very, very nice words, very kind, and couldn't be happier to be here. Very excited for today.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you here, and it's great to being able to show your leadership journey and share it with the audience. This is the purpose of the podcast, is to bring people that is in the trenches, right? It's
Yeah.
like you and me working and deploying great leadership and not necessarily have a platform to share that. So super happy to have you. And I always start with, you made your own transition into leadership. It was an intentional one. And
Mhm.
what inspired you? What was the why? What's the why of transitioning into leadership for you?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think that's a question honestly you get asked in any interview. For when I was making that transition from kind of an individual contributor to
Yeah.
a leader, and the why for me, and I would say it's evolved a little bit too, but the one fundamental kind of common denominator has always been one of having a passion for team success. And within that, and what grounded that was, as a leader, I always felt, and I saw that through my athletic career, and now it's still in my professional career as well, being a leader affords you that extra bit of influence to ultimately dictate, how that team performs, right? So for me, that was, if passion for team success is what I care about, being able to be a leader on whatever team it is or initiative, it affords me that extra bit of influence that ultimately the accountability is on my shoulders to, drive that team forward and try to meet and exceed those objectives. And that's what inspired me. That's what kind of gets me up in the morning. That was something that's always been, I think that's held true since I started to make that first transition to a leadership position. And even
Right.
today, as I
Mm-hmm.
look to, future leadership positions.
Team success. So I listened to you and I pull a couple of threads. You brushed very quickly around. You mentioned something about your athletic career. And I kind of guessed, and I know it, but I would guess that there is a lot of things that you did today that are anchored in your experience as an athlete. So what was that? What was that experience?
It's many, right? From when I look back at an individual contributor career, like you do understand pretty quickly kind of what it takes to be, in the upper echelon of the team, and have that be something that is rooted in you as a desire and an ambition, right? I think that was something I always, I was just wired that way. And I know that sounds cliche, but that is, and I think others could relate to that. You feel like you're wired in a way that I want to be the best, right, on the team. And then when it came to, making that transition to a leadership position and seeing, how influential and strong a coach or leader could be to influence your success, but at the same time, if you're exposed to maybe some poor leadership, how that has an effect on not just you, but your team as well. I saw that firsthand many, 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 many times, right? And I think when, after you see it a few times, you definitely, it instills in you, hey, this is something that if you feel like you're ready and you've developed and been exposed to the experiences you need to put yourself in a position to be successful as a leader, if that's something you're striving towards, you could take it by the horns and actually make it happen and ultimately affect the performance of that team.
There is a lot of people that don't want to be in leadership positions, right? They just don't.
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with the B side of leadership, which
Yeah.
is dealing with people
Yeah.
and all the things that are hard, like higher levels of responsibility.
Yeah.
Typically, the leaders I talk to, there is a seed there that blooms or germinates throughout their career. Was there for you? Was there? Did you recognize it?
Yeah, it was there as long as I can remember, to be honest with you. And I think that's, again, I hope this doesn't come across, disingenuous, because it's just, this is how it's always been. And I think this was and that probably goes even to my upbringing too, Leo, to be honest with you, right? Like this was something that, my parents never said you must be a leader, or do it this way because this is the way a leader would do it, by any means. But I think it becomes a bit natural. And then, in every scenario I was in, again, athletically, professionally, academically, I always strive to be one of the best at the top, and not just, with an empty dream, but rather here's a plan to get there. Right. And I think when it came to the professional world, as you climb the ranks and want to take on more responsibility, which, in actuality is what you're doing as a leader in many cases, that drive and determination never went away, and that ambition never went away. So it's always something where, as you look to the next 3-5 years, how can I take on more responsibility, and,
Right.
what does that role look like? And then ultimately, what's a plan to get there? Right. So that was, I've always had that drive and ambition. And I think it comes down to, I haven't hit a wall yet in that regard.
It's clear to me that you
Yeah.
haven't,
Yeah.
and there is a long road ahead. So if I can take you mentally
Mm.
to that transition moment, right?
Mhm.
That moment where you move from individual contributor to a
Yeah.
leader. Let's put a timeline just a few months or a year before
Yeah.
and a little bit after. What happened in that transition? Was a tap on the shoulder? Was a intentional move into a transition process? How did that look like?
So for me, I would say I wish it was a tap on the shoulder, right? It very much was not. And I would say, if I'm being honest, right, like my age and tenure within any organization was one in which there was still, time to grow. But at the same time,
Yeah.
what I knew in my heart and just, factually, was I was able to kind of gather enough experiences to be ready for that, or as ready as you could be for that next position. And then at
Yeah.
that point, Leo, once you kind of feel like, okay, the time is now, in terms of I've gathered enough experiences, I've been successful in the areas I want to be successful, and really achieved what I set out to achieve as an individual contributor, while at the same time preparing myself for that next opportunity. It then became a bit of a campaign of sorts to really understand, what were those next 2 or 3 opportunities, and ultimately do the legwork to kind of go and meet the hiring managers, get on their radar, and be very clear and intentional, as you said, to, what I believe this next position could be for me and why. So it was a bit of a journey in that regard, multiple processes in which I did not get the role I was aspiring to get, and took those experiences to build for the next one.
All right. Well, there is a lot of gold there, a lot of
Yeah.
nuggets. So we're gonna break it down. I
Let's
don't know
do
if
it.
you
Let's
prepared
do it.
it, but there is
No,
a
no, no.
lot of
I'm
good stuff
I
there.
I'm excited. Let's do it.
You mentioned that you felt that you achieved what you needed to achieve as an individual contributor. Um, what is your opinion about, like, do you need to be accomplished to be a better leader or a great leader or successful as a leader or effective as a leader? What
Yeah.
it seems
It's
like
a
you think you need to, but now in retrospective, do you think it's needed?
I think that's a really good question, and I think I've seen both, right? Where I've seen folks that have been
Right.
extremely successful as individual contributors, and they've carried that success into a first or second line leadership position. I've seen the
Right.
opposite, I'm sure you have, where there's been extremely successful individual contributors that have really struggled, in a first line leadership position, because they just don't have, for one reason or another, those leadership capabilities or competencies that have transferred naturally into that position. My thought was always this: like, I didn't need to be the best in the world, as an account executive necessarily, but I certainly wanted to be able to, again, gain the experiences, the successes that,
Right.
that top 10 or 15% had. And I was lucky enough to do that. Right. So where I take that pedigree, I would say, is, and where there's a benefit is now when you're working with a team, you've been there, done that, and you've done it at a high level, that does naturally build credibility with the team.
Right.
So that was kind of the way I wanted to enter leadership. Was not, I wanted my brand to be someone of, hey, I was successful as an individual contributor. I carried that success into a leadership position, while at the same time, I took a secondary strong focus on building those leadership competencies ahead of that role.
It's very interesting the way I'm processing what you're saying is, first of all, it doesn't necessarily need the success as an individual contributor doesn't necessarily need to manifest as, a big success, but you need to have the experience to aspire and try to get there, because that's the only way you will understand what it takes to be in that successful position, right? And when you
Exactly.
become a leader, you can see that through that experience. So, you're not gonna be a great AE if you don't put the groundwork, the grind on calling, on the practices, right? And
Yep.
the level of, like, how the dial needs to look like to be successful. And if you at least didn't attempt that, it's not going to, it's not, you can't recognize it when you're a leader. Most probably you can't. So that's great. I like it. And one thing I noticed about you now that we're talking through the podcast is, like, when you're talking about leadership, you're not kidding around, right? You get really
No.
serious, you get really intense. And I like the audience to understand, and I do the same. Is that we're not kidding. It's very, very important for us to take the leadership responsibility, right? What's your reaction to that?
As soon as you were saying that, I agree with you. And I think it goes back to my mindset of, leadership is not a destination for me, it's a journey. And I think it is for you. And
Right.
I think you can
Yeah.
tell pretty, you can observe pretty quickly, I think, those who have made that one leadership role the destination versus leaders that are on the leadership journey. And I like to pride myself on being on a journey, and that's why you do take it seriously. It's not a
Yeah.
role to be taken lightly. And I think I'm sure we'll dive into more today about why that is, but it's you have the careers and livelihoods of many at your fingertips to work with, mold, and continue to grow. And I take that very seriously, just as I would
Yeah.
hope, my leadership does with me. So it's a serious topic, but it's a fun topic too.
Yeah, and I think we're also, both you and I are on the journey, right? and
Yeah,
and we're
absolutely.
still learning, and when you're learning, you're concentrated and you're serious. And maybe we will be one day where everything is second nature and we can have a little bit more fun. But right now we get serious through it. You talked about preparing yourself for the role,
Well,
and you use the word intentional.
yeah.
How that look like? What how would you describe it to somebody that is trying to get there today?
For starters, you do have to pick or choose kind of a target that you feel is attainable, that you believe others will feel is attainable. Perhaps you have to, yet again, you might have to, might require some extra legwork to get people mentally there to see you in that position. But you want to pick a couple roles, I would say that, and couple being the operative word in terms of, a few roles that you can dive into and really understand, okay, what is it that role requires to actually make an impact, essentially. And I would say that this was something that I think I learned early on as well. And I had a pretty robust set, and this is a good, advice for anyone listening, I would say, is, I had a very healthy, robust set of mentors outside of the organization that I was at, as well as a few inside, that helped kind of shape and craft and scope what it meant to kind of be intentional for that next role, and how I could kind of shape that vision accordingly. But having a few roles kind of as targets allow you to, number one, not be so single threaded on one role, because again, things happen, changes get made, et cetera, that, ultimately you just may not get that position. But having that diversity across a few different roles, that was a key area for me. And then in terms of being intentional, Leo, to get back to the question, was, again, going back to, whoever was making decisions for those roles, whether those decisions were imminent or whether they were, they were known to be down the road. It was really like forcing my way into an interview, essentially, and being
Right.
very, very clear on, why I believe I could bring that business to the next level, having some thoughtful dialogue to support that, using some of my experiences as obviously as some things to point to as well, where we've had success, and really making them feel that, hey, this is something that we can count on, and Ryan's certainly in the mix for that next opportunity.
Look, now I understand a lot more why you and I we ended up being so connected. But
Yeah,
every leadership role that I got was specifically pursued, right? Was crafted,
yeah,
and it's so important. A lot of people want to get into leadership from the subset of individual contributors that want to get into leadership. They never spoke up. They never
right.
speak up. They
Yep,
never
yep,
tell the hiring manager in their own organization. Some of them are afraid, some of them are entitled, like, well, it
Yeah.
should be me because I'm
Yeah.
here. But the first step starts with you going out there, right?
Right.
And putting yourself out there. I like what you said about optionality. Don't
Yeah.
be so set on a role that
Right.
if it doesn't happen, things change today in all companies, that you created some optionality for you that ended up getting you the first role, which is important. And also, I've been interviewing people, and mentorship is very important, right? So can you tell me two things? One
Mm.
is, was there any specific training or program you went through before becoming a
Yeah.
leader, and what you learned from that? And second
Yeah.
is the impact of those mentors, who they were, how they acted, etc. So it's a kind
Yeah.
of compound question.
Yep.
So giving you the floor to run with it.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, maybe first on the training front. So yeah, internally at the previous organization, there was an aspiring leader program that again, even in that regard, you did have to be intentional, kind of raise your hand to get put into that consideration bucket, essentially. So I was lucky enough to be able to be, accepted into that program and really groomed as a first line leader. That was at SAP. So that was an exciting program, and one that, like anything, you definitely walk away from those types of programs and trainings feeling like I'm more ready than I was, a week ago for that next
Yeah.
opportunity. And there's always things you can continue to kind of find out about yourself in terms of blind spots as you look for that next
How
role.
how
And
long was it? How long
that
was
one
it?
was a multi week, like in person as well as some virtual. So it was actually, it went over about an 8 month period. And what was cool about that, I will say too, it exposed you to some very, very senior leadership inside the organization. It actually combined with another training that I was selected for. That was the Catalyst program at SAP as well. So that was a very highly regarded kind of distinction within the SAP org, and again allowed you to get exposure to some senior executives within the organization and have some open dialogue that allowed you to, in my case, kind of build my story, right, of what I believe I could bring to the table next, and almost bounce that off some senior people that in a safe space. So I thought that was valuable for sure.
Do you remember like some of the topics and the sort of the subjects that were exposed during those trainings that
Yeah.
you kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, I think two in particular, I would say, like topic or subject areas where they helped kind of guide some of my guiding principles on some of those things. One was managing change. Change in this business is constant at any software or technology organization, obviously. So it's being able to kind of come up with effective strategies and methodologies to manage change, not just within your own psyche, but ultimately how you manage change with your team or manage your team through change. Many of those kind of fundamental or foundational skills and have transferred into several different leadership positions that I've done today. So that was probably the big one, actually, I would say at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great. And I think the formal training, it's very important. When I was selecting for so many leaders throughout my career, this is one of the things I look at.
Yeah.
Was there any formal training leading up to that? Because there is a lot of galore out there on, and I'm not sure I'm using the word right, but it's more like, well, everybody's winging it, so I'll wing it, right?
Mhm.
And through formal training, you start getting some actual usable frameworks that you can apply, and they work,
Right.
instead of you trying to just wing it or learn on the
Right.
job.
Right.
Even if it, like you said, I was more prepared than before it.
Right.
I probably wasn't fully ready, and you'll never be fully ready,
No.
but you pick those things that make your life a lot easier and actually accelerate and speed up the process of being effective as a leader, right? And in terms of mentors, like
Yeah.
what was the impact of your mentors throughout your career?
It's been very impactful. And what's been interesting, and I think this was again something that I've focused on and been intentional about, and some of it comes naturally as well, which is the change of your mentors and the evolution of your mentors over time. I've probably had, I thought about this actually before we got on the call today. I probably had over 25 to 30 mentors from when I started,
Oh, wow.
my professional career about 13 years ago. So it's a couple new ones a year, and some have stuck with me. Like I still, I still have a few that I would call up today that I was able to, lucky enough,
Yeah.
to be exposed to, 10, 12 years ago. But one piece of advice that I really took seriously and I put into practice around mentorship was, as you continue to move into different roles or roles that require more responsibility, I was
Mm.
always
Hmm.
searching for mentors, almost, and it's hard to put into words, like almost two levels up, so to speak, right? So
Right. Right.
if you're in a first line leadership position, you would like to have someone in your mentorship, call it board of directors, that is in that more senior position. And why that is not necessarily because that's the role that you're, striving or aspiring to become. However, it's just another perspective, right? And I was really big on, trying to find a diverse series of perspectives across my mentorship base. Because again, I just found that interesting. I'm an analytics guy. So, having more sources of data and then putting it
Yeah.
together and coming together with a decision is always critical. So, mentorship's always been very, very important. And I'm always looking to round out that kind of constant mentorship board of directors around me.
Yeah. The board of directors of mentors
Yeah.
is something that is absolutely critical. I
Yeah.
also love the intentionality about not anybody, not just somebody that you're comfortable with, but somebody that actually it's a couple of steps above.
Yeah.
I love the sort of kind of the thought process around who needs to be almost you have the freedom to make that selection, whether that person likes it or wants it, right? You pick that person and you
Yeah.
observe, you model, and hopefully you get to build a relationship, right?
That's been very successful. I think it's amazing actually over the years, how many, it kind of struck me as, as I thought about it, how many mentors you could work with. And I still to this day can look at each one and say, wow, I picked up this tidbit from him or her, or this really helped me. And I'm unthankful for all of them. And again, in mentorship, receiving mentorship or now giving mentorship, and I do have quite a few mentees as well. I take it very seriously. And that's another area where I think if you're not leveraging mentors, it's you're missing an opportunity for sure.
Yeah, you're missing an opportunity, and I think the ability to build that network and then pick up the phone. Because if you get into leadership and you think you're going to have it figured out, you're going to have a very big surprise. You will
Right.
have stuff, no matter how much you prepared, how organized you were leading up into it. I would predict that in the first 30 days you're going to have to manage some big thing that you're not prepared for. Or it might be a minor
Right.
thing, but you just don't have all the elements. You can pick up the phone and say, like it happened to me this week. I'm putting together compensation plans for
Right.
AEs. I know some parts, but not all of them. So I pick up the
Right.
phone, talk to a CRO friend of mine, texted another one, and in less than half an hour, I got the thing figured out. Right, at
Right.
least I have a couple of options without. So it's your own personal library of mentors. So that's
Yeah.
great. So one more through that transition, and then we'll go into execution and some other
Sounds good.
thoughts. But you said you didn't get the first one that you were
Ugh.
aiming for. So the accomplished Ryan as an individual contributor all of a sudden is, it could be experienced as a big failure, right? So how do you
Yeah.
traverse that? What happened? What was the role? And then you end up getting something. So how that happened?
Yeah. No,
Right.
it's a good question. I think it was third time was the charm. I went through two processes actually where I simply just didn't
Wow.
get the role, was not selected. Different reasons in both cases, but I would say in the first one in particular, you're right. Like there was an element of feeling like, unnatural as it should have been. It felt a bit of like failure to a degree, and it felt like you had done cliches, right? You've done everything that you needed to
Yep.
do, and you thought you had everything lined up, and they went in a different direction, and it was it was tough to swallow, right? And I think to be honest, I probably didn't manage it as well as I would have liked looking back. The good news is I was able to kind of quickly turn the corner and again gather those experiences, understand where there were areas where I could have improved within the process
Yeah.
itself and even prior to the process. And that goes back to the whole being intentional and really getting on the radar, I think was an area of perhaps a blind spot. So as you go through those next ones, by the third one, I was pretty locked in, and I was successful in that pursuit. But that's another aspect where you could be a high flying, successful account executive, first line contributor. That doesn't guarantee you that next role, and that's just not the way the business is, and that's not the way in any aspect of our life. it's not as linear as that, right? So you do have to, like, luck is required, timing's required, and you need to be prepared to accept that, and frankly accept that
Yeah.
rejection and that, quote unquote failure, and have that be part of the process. So the quicker you can kind of accept and digest that, I think the better you'll be off for that overall pursuit.
Yeah. Very, very important concepts
Yeah.
is necessary but not sufficient to
Yeah.
be successful in your role, and wanting is not deserving. Right? So
Yeah.
you might want and you might think you're ready as a leader, but then you realize once you become a leader that are not the same thing, it's not the
Right.
same skill set, and you start growing into that. Right? That's partially why a lot of people have idealized this role of a leadership. They step into it and then step back out because it's just not what they thought about it. Yeah.
And on that topic too, I've seen that's another unfortunate kind of casualty of some of this as well. As I've seen multiple scenarios where really solid first line, or I'm sorry, individual contributors, they pursue one first line's role, first line leadership role. They don't get selected, and yet they basically use that example as, or that experience, and that basically squashes any further desire for them to go for that
Yeah.
next opportunity. So they just can't handle that
Yeah.
initial rejection, or in this case failure. So that's unfortunate as well.
Good. Kudos,
Yeah.
kudos to
Yeah.
you for the
Yeah.
resilience, and it's needed in this job, right?
It
So,
is.
what was different once you stepped into the leadership role from what your mind told you that it was going to be? Like the Rolls Royce is not in the door,
Yeah. Yeah.
people is not bowing to you. Like what was in your mind and what it became to be? But more seriously, like how did you experience that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that popped in my mind that I would say were kind of different. Not a lot different than my expectation, but definitely different. And I think one of them was, I would speak to, again, feeling like you're kind of on top of the heap as an individual contributor, then move into a leadership role, and you're kind of back at, you feel like you're back at square one at times, right? And the reality is, it's your success is not defined anymore as individual success, but it's by your team. And then kind of that brings me to my next point of what was different, and that was, it is very challenging, depending on the team that you have and that you're working with, of how quickly you can influence that success. And I think I think I went in with a mindset that, hey, I can quickly ramp up a team and get them from point A to point B into a point where they're performing at a high level. And the reality is, it takes a lot of time, and it takes everyone pulling on the same side of the rope every day. You can't have a day off in that regard. Like, and
Yeah.
that's the area where I expected that to a degree, but I would say that was probably one of the more eye-opening things was, hey, I want to have
Yeah.
success now. And I was used to, and I was used to,
Yeah, I
if
know
I
that.
if
Yeah.
I personally buckle down, I could make things happen a bit quicker than maybe most, is what I thought. But at a leadership level position, you are at the mercy of your team's day in, day out success, which again, you can certainly put your fingerprints on, but it does take time. So
Yeah.
my patience has grown over time, but it's that was definitely a bit different than maybe what I expected.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're speaking to a very, very big reality when you
Yeah.
become a leader for the first time, maybe also for the second time.
No.
It's like you think you're gonna snap your fingers and everybody's gonna line up to
Right.
what you want, and then you learn that you gotta communicate. It's not only communicate it, you gotta repeat it, and then you gotta do this, and you gotta put a plan, and you gotta put everybody on the same bandwidth, and
Yeah.
it takes time
It does.
for you to internalize that, and then for the
Right.
team to start reacting, and then you're not dealing with computers, it's people that ultimately have their own lives and their own reactions to your message. Some align to it and love it, and some others don't, and I think
Right.
that's also good, right?
100%.
So mistakes, I can't believe you went through all those years of leadership without screwing up one time. Any mistake that comes to mind that you learned
Yeah.
from, and what
Yeah.
did you learn from it?
Yeah. I think one mistake I would say, or something I would certainly do differently, especially this was more specific to my first leadership role, was trying to spin a message of perfection and probably oversell, what our team's success, or what was predicted success versus the reality. And I think that was something I learned pretty quickly as well, was, the reality is the reality. Like the data will be what it is. Our performance will be what it is. There wasn't a lot of benefit, frankly, to kind of telling a rosier story or depicting a rosier story than what was actually there. So I think the first few months, the first couple quarters, I was probably a bit more, bullish on where the business was than in actuality where it turned out to be. And I
Yeah.
think in large part, obviously, just naturally, you want to get off to a good start. You want to, especially in my case, you're starting to, you failed a few times. You finally got this position. You want it to
Yeah.
go really well right from the beginning, when the reality was it was going to take some time to get it to where we needed it to go. So that was probably my biggest, mistake, I would say, or thing I would have done differently. But it was good to experience that as well. And I think that has carried me forward into, as I've moved into different organizations as a leader. You paint the story that's real. You still paint it with
Yeah.
I'm a glass half full opposed to glass, half empty type of person and leader, but you don't sugarcoat things either. So
We live in an industry where you got to be at the same time an optimist and a
that's
realist
right.
or a pessimist, right?
That's
So
right.
you got to give people a lot of people and your AEs, you got to keep them motivated and optimistic about things, but at the same time, you got to look at opportunities and the forecast. And you got to say, well, is this real? And I've been probably one of my areas of development is sometimes I transfer my I misplace them. Like
Right.
I'm
Right.
negative when I need to be my optimist, and I've had my team sometimes kind of push back on me, saying, "No,
Yeah.
we can do this. We can go push it."
Right.
And I'm more like, "Yeah, it's great." If you pick three or four or five things that, as a leader today, you keep your eye on, like your life depends on it, right? What are the things, like if you're talking to somebody that is coming into leadership and you look at your journey and say, okay, these are the things that you can't, not that you cannot miss, but you got to be very, very intentional about
Yep.
all the other stuff fall into place. What are those three or four things that you look at?
I mean, one for sure is team morale. So I think that was an area
Yeah.
where I think you're only as good as your people. You've all heard that. You're only as, as a first line leader, you're only as good as your team, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
your team's success is driven on each individual. And if two or three are just not, not hitting their stride, that's a big problem for everybody, right? And I think so. And
Yeah.
in many cases in our business, Leo, and I think you would agree, is the morale of the team is paramount. And we continue to go through changes as an industry. Change is constant day to day within our business, as I mentioned before. And it's how that affects the morale of the team, where their head is at day in, day out, is very, very important to me. And I think as a first line leader, it needs to be at the forefront. And where we see issues with morale, we try to control them as best we can with what we can control. So that's an area I would certainly keep my eye on. I mean, I think, it goes without saying as well, like what my leadership cares about, right? So at the end of the day, whether it's my direct leader or the broader leadership within the organization, you got to know what and then take to heart and ultimately implement a plan to execute on what the company goals and objectives are, because those change. And I think you could blink and before you know it, you're focused on some things that maybe the company is not as focused on. So I think, and vice versa. So having a real clear eye on, is my team doing day in, day
Yeah.
out what we need to be doing to meet those broader objectives, I think is super important. And then I would say, as a first line leader, like, don't forget to have some fun too. And I would say, like, that's an area where this business moves very quick. It's quarter in, quarter out. It's day in, day out. There's a lot of noise, good and bad. But I would say, make sure you keep your eye on, am I personally enjoying what I'm doing? Am I enjoying the aspects of it? And
Yeah.
find new joys within the day to day, I would say as well. What I found enjoyable and fun as a leader, a year ago versus last week, have changed,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's an
Of course.
area
Yeah.
as well. So those were kind of the three things I would say as a first line leader, you want to keep your eye on.
I'm terrible at having fun. I tend to be extremely serious.
Yeah.
But I think the number two is something that is lost in a lot of leaders I've seen.
Yeah.
That, first of all, as a leader, understanding what your leadership and the company are trying to do
Yeah.
strategically.
Yeah.
And second, take that, articulate it, and embed it in your plan.
That's right.
It's another thing that I see a lot of leaders kind of not taking the time to think that through and understand how that looks like in their organization and implement it, which I
Right.
think you're hitting absolutely the nail in the head there.
Yeah.
So moving on, so we're gonna start landing this plane. We took it off. We've had a great conversation so far.
Yeah.
I think we have another number two, because there is so much stuff that you're dropping, Ryan, that is so important for the people that is looking at it. And you know, starting by the reality that leadership is messy, right? you
Yeah.
you want to get into it, you want everything to be perfect. Like you said, your first experience is like, well, everything's going to be perfect, I'm going to
Right.
project perfection. And you know, it takes a couple of
It's
weeks
not
and you
perfect.
get
Yeah.
punched in the face, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, and you're surely going to get it.
Right.
um how do you manage your mindset? You talked about team morale as one of the
Hmm.
important things, but
Hmm.
you got to take care of you yourself, put the mask on you before you put it somebody
Yeah.
else. How do you manage your mindset?
Yeah. I think it's you know, without at the risk of using too many cliches, it really is, controlling what you can control has been the most effective way to manage my mindset, I think, over the years, honestly. At first it was, oh, stay positive, but the reality is some things aren't positive and you got to be able to adapt quickly. I think the controlling what you can control, whether it comes to things that your team is bringing to you, concerns, issues, complaints, in some cases with internal processes, things like that, you can only control so much. And if you let yourself be consumed by every little thing, especially the things that you can't control,
Yeah,
that's a very tough
you're gonna
road,
burn
right?
out.
And I
Yeah,
think a road that I didn't want to go down, and I haven't, right? So instead, say, hey, I'm going to control what I can control, raise concerns, issues to people that can make a difference or actually make a change. That's been a more healthy, I would say, productive approach to how I handle my mindset day in, day out. And frankly, it gives you more opportunities to, again, focus on what matters, which is the things you can control and the things you can influence.
yeah, same thing. I think it's another pothole and potential derailment for everybody that is listening, that is aspiring to leadership, is going through leadership. Is like, you cannot solve every problem, you cannot
Right.
control every circumstance, and you have to be very selective and understand
Right.
what you can and what you cannot control.
Right.
So that's a great thing as you're executing, right? You project very, very calm, very cool, very, collected.
Yeah.
um, do you allow, or do you think it's positive that leaders allow themselves to emote in front of their team, and why or why not?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one too, because I would say if you would have known me, and maybe some folks listening will say, I was much more emotional years ago than I
Uh-huh.
was today, and I think that
Yeah,
was
it doesn't
something.
show today.
And that was, I worked on that personally, intentionally, to maybe be less emotional on a day-to-day basis, but rather try to kind of have that even keel, kind of a calm, cool, collected, approach to many of the decisions I made, or as things kind of came my way. I would say I've been exposed in many cases to, leaders and coaches that have been extremely emotional and quite the opposite. I personally react maybe more, better to someone that might show a bit of emotion. Like I've never shied
Hmm.
away from someone kind of putting emotion on their sleeve. I think where I've been able to show emotion in my leadership career thus far, it's been, when we're in positions where, hey, we know we have to achieve something, it's starting to get down to the wire, so to speak. That authenticity and that transparency and ultimately that emotion starts to come out with the team to say, no one's hiding here. This is what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen. And
Yeah.
this is, I want everyone to rally behind this objective and let's go do it. I think, being too emotional, yeah, you put yourself at the risk of maybe that works the first few times, but eventually you might lose the audience, right? And I think that's an area where
Yeah.
I tried to
Yeah.
be very, very intentional in ensuring that that was not the kind of leadership style I wanted to project. And
Right. It's a great thing, and I think as I develop as a leader, you learn to control what triggers you,
right,
and you also learn to I wouldn't say manipulate, but kind of understand what certain emotion that you project, how it
Hmm.
impacts people. So you start using that
Right.
for the good of the team, right?
Right.
So we're always trying to elicit some sort of action and emotion. And, if I get all riled up, people's going to get all riled up, or
That's
they
right.
might not interpret it well. But sometimes you need to be
Yeah.
emotional, right? You
Yep.
need to say, guys, if we don't do this is going to happen, right? And I'm really stressed about it, and but use it intentionally, not
That's right.
not just let it flow just because, right? Because you can create a lot of havoc. And you also got to have the foresight to say, I'm going to react this way, and then I'm going to catch them on the other side, right?
That's
So
right.
they don't, right? So don't let it go crazy. So I appreciate that. Great. So we see the landing strip. We're getting there now. The sort of the a little brainy questions is, when you look back in your youth, right? When you look
Mhm.
back in your experience as a very formative years of your life, um, I like to explore episodes that stuck with you, and you now use those skills, or that episode influence you as a leader today, gave you a skill, or perhaps tells you some things that not to do. So the question is, like, can you pick one of those episodes, and how that has impacted you as a leader today?
It's difficult to kind of narrow it down to one episode, but I would just say there's been a few
Oh, of course, there are many. Yeah.
examples, clearly. Yeah. Yeah. Clearly in my past where, and most of them do still kind of I tend to get drawn back to like an athletic setting where I've seen firsthand good coaching, inspiring coaching, the ability to kind of craft a vision that people can rally behind, and how that made me feel, and how excited and motivated and inspired it made me feel to want to go out, in this case on the ice from a hockey perspective, and get the job done. And I just remember, multiple kind of, either whether it was pregame discussions or in-game discussions with coaching, that I try to emulate some of that theme and that mantra within how I approach my leadership career today. The power of motivational leadership and motivational coaching, I believe, is very strong. And in this business that we're in too, everyone has their own motivations, and sometimes people need a nudge, and being able to do that effectively is a really, really important skill if you can master it. And I'm not there yet, but I do believe that's an area that I continue to focus, and I think it's an effective one.
And absolutely, and it shines through your teams, right? So before I let you go, one double click on that. It's
Yeah.
any framework or anything that you can share with the team or the audience about how do you do that? How do you build that motivational message, or like how would you deconstruct one of those?
Yeah, I think there's, again, and it can be challenging at times because it's not everyone's motivation is aligned, right? But I do think, at the end of the day, we're all on team, whatever organization you're at, right? And I think that's where I try to drive it around a common goal that most, if not all, people should be able to agree, hey, this is something when I wake up every day we want to achieve. And then being able to kind of craft what it means when we do achieve that objective or that goal. So it's not just to achieve it for the sake of achieving it, but what does that really mean to our shareholders, to our investors, to the broader ecosystem, et cetera. There's a lot of power in that final 5 yards after we go and achieve a goal, and having people understand, wow, I could be a part of that, and that's exciting. And this gives me a bit more of a, why I'm doing this, clarity that maybe people are looking for. I think sometimes we get lost in the detail, or we get lost in, the journey sometimes of how to get there, and maybe forget, what it means when we get there. And I think that's where I try to shine a bit of a light on that, and make sure that we get everyone excited, and that's and motivated. So that's to me an area where I think we've really been able to unlock something.
Creating and articulating and motivating image or
Yeah.
vision is critical for
Yeah.
for leadership. And some leaders are very operational, right? We need to
Yeah.
do this A, B, and C. And I think adding that layer is tremendously impactful, and
Yeah.
and tailoring that to what it means to each individual. It's a lifelong journey to get there, hands on the journey. So
That's right.
Ryan, again, I think you've poured gold and silver throughout the podcast. I mean, there is a lot that people probably can take on and implement their own journey. I just want to take a couple of minutes just to celebrate you as a leader. A couple of things that come to mind. One is I'm sure we're going to look at this 10 years from now, and it's going to be a nice little thing that the CEO of X, which is going to be you, is going to look back and is going to say, look, when I was just a young leader, I did this podcast with this guy. You can go in, like if somebody's researching you, they can look at this and see you in progress. So that makes me very, very proud of having you here and privileged. The second one is, I wish I could have been part of your team and not, your leader, because I would have loved to experience that motivation that you bring to the team, and to your execution, right? Because I feel I'm missing out, but I know you're doing tremendous work. You're deploying fantastic leadership in Colibra and probably in your future. So happy to have you here. I had a great ride. Anything that you want to share with the audience? Any last thoughts?
Well, I would just say, thank you. Right. I mean, I'm privileged to and humbled, honestly, to be, one of the guests on the podcast. And I really enjoyed, your leadership, and that's something that I think, this is a fantastic platform to bring together, leaders, aspiring leaders, and everyone alike to really get a good glimpse and vision into kind of what, where you are today and where you might want to go. So, and some of the trials and tribulations that may come along with that. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And again, I'm just glad to be a part of it. And, hopefully your listeners, again, pick up a little something that they can bring with them to, drive them forward.
They sure will. They sure will. Thanks, Ryan, for being with us today. And the door is open for number 2. So we'll get together soon.
I'm ready. Thank you, Leo. Take care.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this or any other episode of On the Journey podcast, please subscribe, like, or comment in your favorite podcast platform. This episode of On the Journey's idea, writing, recording, and production was created by me, Leo Rodriguez, and it was edited by Martes Multimedia, owned by Ricardo Urdaneta. You can find Martes Multimedia or Ricardo Urdaneta through Upwork.